So I think it's safe to say that pretty much all of us have used a Crayola product at some point in our lives, most likely as kids. I feel like everyone has at least one childhood memory tied to those bright yellow boxes. And since Crayola products are mostly aimed at kids, they are super affordable, but not exactly something you'd reach for to create a masterpiece. Or are they? Today, you're gonna find out what happens when I, an amateur artist and avid adult colorist, spends 8 hours coloring only with Crayola art supplies. Did I end up creating something that I'm proud of, or was it a total train wreck? Let's find out. So to do this challenge, I picked up 4 Crayola products. First up, a 24 pack of their crayons, a true Crayola staple. I grabbed these off of Amazon Australia for a whopping $3.50, and yep, they're exactly as I remember them. I haven't used non-artist grade crayons since I was a kid, and so yes, these do not lay down as nicely, they aren't as creamy, but I had a vision for the piece I wanted to create during this challenge, and I felt pretty confident that I could make them work. Next up is a product that I honestly think might be more popular among adults than kids these days, and that is the Crayola Supertips. I've already got them displayed behind me here. You can get these in packs as large as 100, but I decided to go with a more specialized 40 pack that has 20 regular colors and 20 pastel colors. I wanted that mix so I could use the stronger, more saturated colors for backgrounds and then the pastels for basing. And this pack was $18 from Kmart here in Australia. Purchase number 3 was, of course, some colored pencils. I was going back and forth between 3 different sets for this video. First up was the standard regular Crayola colored pencils. Then there was the step up, which were the Crayola pencils that were targeted towards grown-ups. And finally, I considered the Crayola signature shade and blend pencils, which are considered to be their premium option. After doing a bit of research though, I saw a lot of reviews of people saying that the signature pencils really aren't that different from the regular ones. Maybe a bit more pigmented, but not enough to justify the significant price jump. So I ended up going with the middle ground option. This is the 100 pack of Crayola pencils for adult coloring enthusiasts, as outlined in the product description. I picked these up for just under $54 on Amazon Australia. And when I swatched a couple of 3 color blends to test them out, I was shocked by how hardcore these pencils were. And I don't mean hardcore as in like intense, but as in their core was really hard. For the first swatch, I tried somewhat of a blending / burnishing method, and then the second swatch I did a layering method, which I did find somewhat more effective than the first. But yeah, someone who generally uses a more soft core pencil, I was definitely feeling a little nervous after those initial swatches. But moving on to the 4th product I purchased for this video, and it was a little bit of a wild card. If you are a loyal subscriber to this channel, you'll know how much I love my acrylic marker details. And so I definitely was trying to find some sort of Crayola paint pen that I could use for this challenge. From my search results though, it doesn't seem like Crayola makes anything within that realm. So my best option was to pick up the Crayola Signature Neon Lights Effects markers, which come with 1 white paint marker. I won't be doing any sort of neon effects for the coloring page today, but I thought I would still try out the markers just for curiosity's sake. And yeah, they kind of worked, but also kind of didn't. I bought them for just under $10, so they probably work as well as you'd expect for that price point. But at least I had some sort of white acrylic style marker for this video. even if the tip was a lot thicker than I would have liked. The only non-Crayola products that I ended up using were my dull 133 pencil sharpener, which actually kind of struggled with these pencils. Maybe the barrels are a little bit thick, who knows? I also used a cheap water brush from Montmartre, and I also used a non-Crayola coloring book, Vibrant Wilds by Sarah Renee Clark. If you've been around my channel for a while, you'll know how much I love this book. On the page I've already colored in this book, I did a bunch of watercolor layers and there was barely any buckling, which is why I chose it for this challenge, because I knew I wanted to use quite a bit of water for the background. Lately, I have been totally obsessed with mixed media art journaling spreads. I've been scrolling through them for months now, and I even tried bringing that style to one of my own coloring pages. Well, not my own coloring page, but my own coloring of a page. I loved it just so incredibly much, so I thought, why not give it a go again for this challenge for this page right here in Vibrant Wilds. So recently, I've been seeing a lot of artists and colorists on various social media platforms using the Crayola super tips to create watercolor effects. And so I decided to give that technique a try for myself for the background of this coloring page. But before diving straight in, I did trial the effect on the book's test page, because I've seen people do this via 2 different methods, and I just wanted to figure out which one was best and most effective for me. The first technique involves applying the marker directly to the page and then adding water. But as you can see, that did not work for me at all. So I moved on to the second method, which is scribbling the marker onto a paint palette or plate like I've done here, and picking up the pigment with a water brush and then applying it to the page. This worked so much better, so I knew this was the technique I was going to use for my background. And to put it lightly, I absolutely went to town with color for this page. I even threw in a few of the signature neon lights effects markers, because this technique isn't exclusive to the super tips. It works with any water-soluble marker. But the super tips are definitely one of the more budget-friendly water-soluble markers that you can find. I found though that the more saturated, brighter color markers worked best, since the pigment gets diluted the second you add water. So unless you're specifically going for a more subtle wash of color, I'd recommend sticking to the more bolder markers in your sets. Now, some people might say that I went a little bit overboard with color for this background, and yes, I can totally see that. But I really just wanted to have fun with this page. I wanted to tap into that wild, creative freedom that I used to feel as a kid when using Crayola products, and not get hyper-fixated on the end result, which is kind of the whole spirit of mixed media art journaling anyway. It's about experimenting, not second-guessing yourself, and just enjoying the process. So I really did try to embrace that playful, maximalist vibe whilst working on this page, even though my inner critic definitely tried to chime in a few times. Once I was happy with how the watercolor background was looking, I then brought in the classic Crayola crayons for some fun doodly details. I mostly stuck to simple shapes like dots and crosses to have a little bit of cohesion across the page. One thing I really enjoyed doing here was clustering together repetitive marks and using a bunch of different colors within those clusters. It's such an easy way to add interest and texture to any background without needing any expert drawing skills, which I definitely fall into that category. I highly recommend giving it a go for your next background in one of your coloring pages, especially one that has a lot of blank space to work with. After that, I reached for the white paint pen to add some extra doodly elements, mainly to break up the explosion of color I had going on. But I've got to say, I was not thrilled with how this marker performed. The tip was super thick and hard to control, and the ink dried really translucent, which, you know, wasn't the look I was going for whatsoever. It definitely had me a little worried about how it would affect the signature acrylic marker details I like to do at the end of my coloring process. But before I could stress too much about that, it was time to move on to basing. As I said earlier, I bought the pastel super tips for basing the elements on the page, and I was surprisingly impressed. Since these markers are water-based, there was no bleed through to the other side. And while I did encounter a tiny bit of streakiness, it honestly wasn't bad at all. My biggest tips for avoiding streaks when working with water-based markers is to use lighter colors as much as possible. The streaks are way less noticeable. And to also color in smaller sections while lifting the tip off the page as little as you can. You'll see that I didn't always follow this advice because I can be a little bit of an impatient colorist sometimes, but I tried to stick with it for the most part. Now, usually I'd base an entire page before going in with my colored pencils, but I wasn't entirely sure what colors I wanted to use for the floral elements as of yet. So I decided to start by just basing and shading the leaves. And when I first went in with the colored pencils, oh my gosh, it was such a shock to the system. Like I said during the swatching, I have never used a pencil with such a hard core, and that became even more evident when I started working with them on this page. You could definitely say that I was on struggle street. But the more I played around with them, the more I was able to make them work for me. The biggest tip I'd give you if you're also working with a harder core pencil for the first time is to work in light layers. That was my saving grace, and anytime that I pressed a little too hard, it became really tricky to get a smooth blend. The general coloring process that I followed is very similar to the process I use with my Artex and Brute Funa pencils. I'd start with a mid-tone shade, then I'd use a highlight shade to blend that into the base color, and then add extra depth and dimension with an even darker shadow shade. But because I was working in such light layers, or at least lighter layers than what I'm used to, I did have to repeat that process several times, and yeah, my coloring time was quite extended. But alas, I didn't actually end up hating these colored pencils by the end of the challenge, and I'm looking forward to giving them a go a few more times in some of my other coloring books. I feel like they deserve a few more chances before I completely write them off. One book I specifically want to try them in is Fairy Tales and Folklore by Emily Lederhall Oberg. I still haven't found a set of pencils that I really love using in that book, and I've heard a lot of colorists say that polychromos work well on that paper. Now, I've never tried polychromos myself, but these Crayola pencils kind of give me budget polychromos vibes just because of how hard the core of the pencil is. So I'm going to try them out in that book, maybe in a couple of others to see if they perform better on different types of paper. And if they don't, they might need to find another home. What I do like about these pencils though are their color range. I didn't make a full swatch chart, but just from the random swatches I did while figuring out different color combos for the page, I really appreciated the inclusion of more muted, earthy tones. I think it's partly because they're a cheaper, less pigmented pencil, but it was actually a refreshing change from my usual pencil sets, which are very vibrant and saturated. Oh, and another thing that I absolutely loved was that I hardly had to sharpen them. When I use my Artex or Prismacolor pencils, I feel like I'm constantly sharpening them during the coloring process to maintain a fine tip. But with these Crayolas, I did one initial sharpen and that was pretty much it. I basically didn't need to sharpen them for the rest of the challenge, so that is a major plus in my book. Now, once all of the elements of the illustration were colored, I did go off camera to add some shadows, mainly to help separate the foreground from the very busy, chaotic background. And I definitely think that helped bring a bit more structure to the page. However, it was at this point that I was so tempted to abandon the only Crayola product part of this challenge. I desperately wanted to grab some higher quality acrylic markers to finish the page off. The urge was so real. But I reminded myself that I'd already come this far. I had pushed through the learning curve of the hardcore Crayola pencils, and so I couldn't give up right at the end. So I did use the below average white Crayola paint pen, and I still don't know how I feel about it. I ended up going over the white background doodles I'd added earlier with a second layer because they were looking super translucent. And when it came to adding the acrylic highlights to the foreground elements, yeah, the thick marker tip just was not it. I feel like the details would have looked so much better if I'd been able to use a fine tip marker or even just some different acrylic marker colors. But alas, that wasn't part of the challenge. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have bothered with the acrylic marker details. It might have looked better beforehand. But at least I stayed true to the challenge. And in a way, the chunky, messy, white paint pen kind of works with the whole maximalist, imperfect aesthetic of mixed media art journaling anyway. And so I did say that was the look I was going for at the beginning. Let's just call it a creative choice. Next time I color in this style though, I really want to try covering all of the line work on the page with different acrylic marker colors. I'm curious to see if that helps transform the page into something that looks more like an intentionally, beautifully chaotic and messy mixed media art journaling spread rather than a traditional coloring page. So there we have it, everyone. After 8 hours of only coloring with Crayola art supplies, this is the final result. There were definitely some ups and downs along the way, but honestly, I did have a lot of fun playing around, experimenting with new techniques, and testing out products that I usually wouldn't reach for, which was the whole part of this challenge. Considering the limitations I had, I'm fairly sure I'm happy with how the page turned out. I'm still a little bit undecided. If I had to pick a favorite Crayola product from this video though, I'd definitely say that the super tips were the standout for me. They were just a whole lot of fun to play around with, and I'll definitely be using them again for watercolor effects and basing. As for my least favorite product, no surprises, it was definitely the Neon Lights Effects markers, in particular the very underwhelming white paint pen. That pen had absolutely zero opacity. However, I might use it again in the future if I'm going for a very translucent effect. If you made it to this point in the video, leave a pencil or crayon emoji in the comments below so I know who the true MVPs are. And I've also included my affiliate link for Vibrant Wilds in the description box. So if you've been thinking about picking it up, it's a great way to treat yourself whilst also supporting the channel in a small way. But until next time, happy coloring, friends. Have a good day, have a good life, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!